We all know that video game movies haven't had a particularly good reputation nor a good history among moviegoers and gamers alike. Hollywood writers and directors just haven't made a legitimately well-written and faithful adaptation of a popular game franchise yet, and at this point, people are getting sick of it. I mean, 2016 could have been promising. We got 4 movies based on franchises that could have made a decent, if not great transition into a movie, and only one of them manages to be somewhat passable, and it's a mobile game. That's kind of embarrassing. Now we have Tomb Raider, based on a 2013 reboot of the popular adventure franchise. Unlike the video game movies in 2016, this isn't the first time that Lara Croft has jumped onto the silver screen. Tomb Raider has seen 2 films starring Angelina Jolie that were released in the early 2000s, to major financial success for the first one, not so much critical, and the second one straight up flopped. I figured that in a similar vein to the 2013 game, if that was able to bring new life to this nearly 22-year-old game series, this film might have the possibility to bring that into video game movies. It's probably my overly optimistic attitude that's making me believe that, if it's not plain thick-headedness, but there's still hope. Lara Croft, now young and struggling in life, holds no choice but to take her father's inheritance after he vanishes from the public eye for 7 years. Upon further exploration, she encounters her father's research on the Himiko project, discovering the tomb of the reviled queen in the uncharted island of Yamatai, supposedly containing the secrets of the afterlife, but actually containing a weapon that could end the world as we know it. Now, she's on the search of her father, and soon the dreaded tomb of Himiko, where she'll have to venture across rapid waters and the unforgiving island of Yamatai. I walked into Tomb Raider expecting it to be the 2018 equivalent of the Power Rangers reboot. Not a masterpiece, as that film boasted a pretty generic story when you really think about it, but it had a decent enough script with likable characters and respect to the source material that it led me to forgive its shortcomings. I was kind of right? I can definitely see why some are quick to call this the best video game adaptation so far. It's nowhere near as pretentious and problematic as Assassin's Creed, not as silly or stupid as the Super Mario Bros. Movie, or as mind-bogglingly boring as Warcraft. To say this film doesn't have its strong points would be lying, in my opinion. To start off on a positive note, I think this film nails the tone of the reboot while providing its own changes that helps the film stand on its own merits. The 2013 game goes for a darker and arguably more realistic direction, and while I wouldn't call the film's tone realistic, it runs on the same physics and logic as the games. I mean, if it's actually realistic, then Lara should technically be dead. It still retains the tension and grit of the game, especially in the action scenes. When Lara attacks a henchman or climbs up on the rotting remains of a plane near a waterfall, it really feels like if she could die at any second. It does seem a bit odd when she survives all these sequences, again, video game logic and everything, but the film does make sure to show some of the consequences of her actions, like getting a pretty bad stabbing wound from a branch, or being traumatized when murdering someone in cold blood, though her reaction is kind of cut short, and later on she suddenly has no problem with killing other mooks. It kind of renders that scene a bit pointless when you really think about it. I also appreciate the script's attempts at grounding some of the more supernatural elements into reality. Apparently, the whole thing about Himiko in the game is akin to, say, the Horned King's plan from the Black Cauldron, which is a little bit out there for a film that mostly portrays itself as a grittier Indiana Jones. Instead, The film plays out Himiko's legend as a disease that she was immune to, but carried and could potentially create a worldwide epidemic if it was spread. Some may be bothered by the change, I wasn't. I still felt like it had a little bit of supernatural elements to it, but not so much that would ruin my suspension of disbelief. Believe me, the running and jumping taking place here already does a good job at that. I also commend the screenwriters for providing some levity and light humor when appropriate, so that it doesn't fall into the whole grimdark adaptation trap that Assassin's Creed and Warcraft fell into. I'm sorry, aside from their script and story issues, I just thought the two were very boring to watch. They were just really joyless, and for their silly premises, they took themselves way too seriously. As a bonus, I think the jokes fit the tone and the moment rather well. It's not like the recent Marvel films where they're just too silly for the tone, or they ruin an epic moment, or they just drag a good joke down to the ground. It feels naturally paced, and it doesn't make a scene last for too long. As far as the base personality goes, I like this film's interpretation of Lara Croft. I think it can be best described as the 2013 incarnation with bits of older Laura's spunk and attitude woven into her here and there. She has her cocky moments, and she can be pretty reckless, especially in the beginning of the film, but once she's shipwrecked onto Yamatai, she still has the vulnerability that makes her feel more believable and human. I will say that their character arc of becoming a survivalist from the 2013 game doesn't meet its full potential here, but I'll get to that later. Alicia Vikander also plays a part in Lara's likability. She completely owns the character. To track back to the Power Rangers expectation I had, Vikander's performance really reminds me of RJ Cyler's performance as Billy Cranston. They both feel like they truly embraced their character traits, even when the script wasn't the best and had them delivering a cheesy or stupid line. When Vikander had to play a moment of emotion such as sadness or fear, she really sold it. I believe the grunts had something to do with it. It feels sincere, and I end up seeing Vikander for her character, rather than just the actress. A trait that I see too much in many big-budget films.
Lara, your father's gone. But you can pick up where he left off. It's in your blood.
I'm sorry. I'm just not that kind of Croft.
I also like Daniel Wu's character Lu Ren. He's probably the first half source of humor as a laid-back drunken sailor, especially since his interactions with Laura bounce off pretty well when they first meet.
Now all I need to do is to figure out what these are. I think these are coordinates. The location.
They're clock hands.
They're not clock hands. Definitely not clock hands. They are clock hands. That's the one.
That's right in the middle of the Devil's Sea. You might as well tie a stone to your foot and jump off the boat now.
It'll be an adventure.
Death is not an adventure.
Thankfully, he's not just the comic relief. He does support the plot in a few ways, such as helping Laura get to Yamatai, helping her on other occasions like rescuing captives on the island, but that's kind of it. I do wish that they appeared more in the film's runtime, because as it stands, he feels a little more like a plot device rather than a character. And I think Daniel Wu provides a decent amount of charisma with this guy. It's just that he doesn't really have enough screen time to leave an impact. And as far as positives go, that's unfortunately it. I think the biggest problem with the screenplay is that a lot of the film's plot elements are not only compiled from a lot of action films before it, specifically The Last Crusade, but it doesn't really deliver anything new to make it interesting or fresh. Let's start off with a lighter criticism, at least in comparison to the rest. The film is definitely a bit repetitive with its storytelling devices. To be more specific, this film uses flashbacks like it's crack. At best, it feels pointless and it's a lazy method of bringing in backstory to the characters or plot. At worst, there are a few replay clips and dialogue that don't need to appear. It feels like that the writers didn't trust their audience enough to make the connection to the present event. That, or the writers thought that their screenplay was so forgettable already that they needed to remind the audience that Laura knows how to open a tomb, or that there was more to Himiko's legend from something that we learned earlier in the film. Though I think the biggest downfall that this screenplay has is that its emotional core just plain sucks. All because it doesn't give me a reason to like Richard Croft, Lara Croft's father, and to care about their relationship. Richard's characterization is very one note. He merely wants to stop Trinity from getting into Himiko's tomb, and aside from one scene where he asks a few questions about Laura's current life, he doesn't seem particularly interested in his daughter's life. Heck, I'd even argue that he's borderline selfish at points. His motivation on why he even researches the Himiko legend at first is to find the possibility of reuniting with his dead wife, so he decides to leave Laura at a young age and basically was never there for her entire childhood. Wouldn't it just be a better idea for him to stay with Laura and to raise her for her entire life? I'm pretty sure the mother would want that. It just ends up making me confused on why Laura even wants to find her father in the first place. The film tries to use flashbacks between him and a younger Laura to establish a relationship, but aside from being lazy like I said before, most of them involve her father leaving her, the second of which taking place shortly after he comes back. And the so-called connection they share with a kiss motif is so sappy. That's not development, that's the rotting putrid smell of aged cheese. If you want me to believe that there is some kind of relationship between Richard and Laura in the beginning events of the movie, then show me something that relates to their relationship. Or better yet, show me something that involves Richard showing something related to his adventure and archaeology studies that would interest Laura in that field. Like, teach her archery, show her some of your old books, just do something of substance. I'd even argue that the whole father-daughter situation actively holds Laura's character development back, and it has her do stupid decisions that could have easily been avoided. There's this scene in the film where she gets the idea of recovering her father's research, stealing a satellite radio from Vogel, the main antagonist of the film, and rescuing the captains. Laura's father wants nothing to do with it, but what does Laura do? She goes out on her own, with a bow and a set of arrows on her back, and does the deed herself. And I thought it was one of the best parts of the film. This was one of the scenes, aside from the game-inspired sequences, where Laura was finally becoming the strong, independent hero that we all know and love. She nearly succeeds at rescuing everyone too. Well, up until she decides to go back for Richard, who foolishly approaches the tomb and is caught at gunpoint by Vogel. And when Vogel tries to taunt Laura into shooting him, in which he would have shot Richard first, Laura just gives up. I understand the reason why she gives up. She doesn't want to go all this way just to see her father die. But given my disinterest in Richard's character, I just thought she made a really stupid decision. Richard even tries to convince her that him dying wouldn't be in vain, and yet she still puts down the bow and thus puts down her moment to shine. It doesn't help that Dominic West feels like they're snoozing through his performance. I get that more people would blame the script and that West is trying to give a decent performance with what he's given. And I can agree on that, but like the character himself, there isn't really that much to West's performance that really stuck with me, other than the fact that he plays all of Richard's dialogue so seriously, despite the fact that the script has him repeat the whole "the world is going to end through Himiko's virus tomb" thing spiel so many times.
Hello, Sprout. If you're listening to this, then I must be dead. I found something, a tomb called the Mother of Death. If Trinity succeeds, our world is in danger. Promise me you you will stop them. There's an organization called Trinity. It's looking to start a global genocide.
I think it just would have honestly been better if they just kept her father dead, and had the adventure in Yamatai satisfy Lara's desire to pave her own path, or to honor the Croft legacy by finishing her father's research. It would have fleshed out Lara's character a little bit more, and it would have been more faithful to her character development in the game. With the lazy way that her father is written, every emotional moment between them just falls flat, and it feels like a pointless attempt at trying to get the audience emotionally invested into the film's story. Another problem with the script is Matthias Vogel, played by Walter Goggins. He's a pretty lackluster villain. So this guy's a mook that Trinity sent to Yamatai to raid the tomb of Himiko. His family is held captive and he cannot come back until he brings back Himiko's secrets. Initially, he's played in a sympathetic light, and I think that would have been a great way to approach his character, but any sympathy that I had towards him is immediately lost when he becomes the one-note bad guy and starts to do antagonistic things. I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to paint him as a probably decent guy that's just pushed to the edge and at this point is tired and just wants to go back home to his family. But some of his actions, like bluntly telling Lara that he shot her father, or killing one of the captains that eventually becomes too ill to work, it feels a bit too antagonistic. It just kind of makes it harder to like him and much easier to hate him, but even then, I don't think the film gets enough screen time for him to leave an impression on either side. He's just a boring character all around. And the one positive thing I can kind of say about him is that Walton Goggins at least tries to give a decent performance, and from what he's given, he does a serviceable enough job.
Lara Croft! You shouldn't have come here. I'm glad that you did. Pack it up! We're moving camp! Alright, let's pack it up!
I think this film was on the right track towards making a decent adventure film and a good adaptation, but it feels too empty, underdeveloped, and cliche. It feels like the screenwriters didn't even finish the final draft and they needed a few more rewrites towards reaching the filming stage. And I can't help but agree on the prospect of this film needing more rewrites. The one major positive I can give to this film's presentation is that, like the screenplay, it captures the gritty vibe of the game rather well. Aside from that, it's mostly unremarkable. The cinematography is rather bland most of the time. It's probably the strongest and most unique in the action sequences. The chase sequences' dolly shots have a fast pace that help the tense feeling of the scene, and whenever the camera is in motion with a handheld type view, it manages to be shaky and quick enough to be a bit thrilling. Aside from that, the rest is blah. Character exchanges are done with the same shot template as any other generic Hollywood film. A lot of medium shots and close-up shots, an occasional wide or extreme close-up shot, all without much variation. It gets the job done to be sure, but it's not visually striking or unique. The practical effects and CGI are serviceable. I will admit there are some sequences where the CGI can stick out like a sore thumb, such as some of the shots of the boat crash or the waterfall surrounding the wrecked plane, but there really doesn't seem to be as much CG as I anticipated, and it doesn't really stick out as badly as some of the stuff that I've seen in, say, Black Panther. The jungle set does look rather nice, retaining a gritty and desolate look despite taking place mostly in daylight, but it doesn't really stick out much in terms of memorability, like a lot of the other things in this movie. The editing is more competent than I thought, especially for an action movie like this one, but it still has its issues. Unlike Assassin's Creed, I can tell what's going on in the film's action sequences, mostly because it gives me the chance to see what's on screen for more than a split second. There's still some shots here and there that cut a little too quickly, but it's not apparent enough to ruin the immersion for me. The fist fight scenes, however, had this issue prominently, aside from the MMA-like fight in the beginning of the film. I almost blanked out at the last one between Lara and Vogel because I could barely tell who was making the next move on camera until it pulled back into a wider shot. Not only was the cinematography so close to the point that it was uncomfortable, but there was an onslaught of jump cuts, so much so that it probably would have given me a headache if I were to actually pay attention to the scene. And finally, Junkie XL's score is mostly forgettable. It does elevate the action sequences a little bit, but it's your typical Hollywood score without much personality. Are you really surprised at this point? Just about everything else in this movie is super generic and dull, so why not the score? I wouldn't consider Tomb Raider another video game failure, but I wouldn't call it a success either. This cinematic reboot offers a few strengths in the form of Alicia Vikander and its grounded tone, but an undercooked script and a generic presentation severely cuts this down to being a serviceable, but mostly forgettable adventure film. While I'm disappointed in the missed potential this film had, I'm still open to exploring Laura's journey further in future sequels, as long as it manages to have a stronger script. It does have a solid foundation for an origin story, and I think with Vikander's acting chops and having both Rise and the upcoming Shadow of the Tomb Raider at their disposal, there's still plenty of material to salvage a decent franchise off the famous IP. But at the same time, I don't know. I don't think I can tolerate another average to mediocre action flick. There's too many of those already. If I had to make a recommendation, I don't think it would hurt to see this in theaters at a matinee screening. I mean, that's what I did. But I really wouldn't blame you if you just waited to see this on home video instead. There isn't really that much you're missing if you skip this in the theater. Tomb Raider is definitely proof that we're getting better at adapting video games onto film, but unfortunately we still have a long way to go.